They just wanted to check on the final wedding arrangements. Marcus and Alana, a calm black couple, quietly walked into the ballroom they owned. But the white bride, Emma, stopped the music, pointed at them, and shouted, "You don't belong here. This isn't your kind of place." What she didn't know: Marcus Carter was the billionaire owner of the luxury hotel, and Alana, his wife, designed the entire venue. By the end of the night, every guest would be stunned, jaws dropped, as the bride was escorted out of their property in tears. Before we find out what happens next, tell us in the comments. Have you ever seen someone humiliate the wrong person? And if this story already has you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. The air in the grand ballroom of the Carter Grand Hotel shimmered. It was a space designed to take one's breath away, and tonight, it was succeeding. Thousands of white roses, imported that morning, climbed elegant table centerpieces and wrapped around the marble pillars that reached for the impossibly high ceiling. Each pillar was a story of its own, carved with intricate details that Alana Carter had sketched herself on a sleepless night years ago. From the ceiling hung 3 colossal crystal chandeliers, their light refracting into a million tiny rainbows that danced across the polished floor. A string quartet, positioned on a small elevated stage, played a soft classical piece, the music weaving through the low hum of conversation. The guests, a sea of silk, satin, and tailored suits, murmured to one another, their voices a gentle river of sound. Champagne flutes clinked like tiny bells, a constant, cheerful punctuation to the serene atmosphere. Everything was perfect. It was the kind of perfection that money could buy, but also the kind that only genuine artistry could create. This was more than a room. It was a sanctuary of opulence, a testament to a vision of unparalleled luxury. And it was all about to be shattered. The grand oak doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open, but not with the dramatic flair of an important announcement. They opened quietly, almost hesitantly, and 2 figures stepped inside. It was Marcus and Alana Carter. They were dressed in what could only be described as understated elegance. Marcus wore a simple pair of dark slacks and a gray cashmere sweater, the kind of clothing that spoke of quiet confidence rather than a need for attention. Alana was beside him in a simple, well-cut navy dress, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. They did not walk to the center of the room. They did not seek the spotlight. Instead, they moved along the wall, their steps measured and silent. Marcus's eyes scanned the ceiling, checking the way the light from the chandeliers hit the far corners of the room. Alana's gaze was lower, tracing the lines of the floral arrangements. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she noted the placement of each vase. They were phantoms in their own masterpiece, invisible architects checking the foundations of their creation. They were there to ensure that every single detail was flawless for the bride and groom, to make sure this night was everything the young couple had dreamed of. But they were not invisible to everyone. Emma Whitfield, the bride, stood near the center of the room, a glass of champagne held aloft in her perfectly manicured hand. Her white dress, a cascade of lace and pearls, made her the undeniable focal point of the hall. She was laughing, a bright, brittle sound, when her eyes swept the room and landed on the quiet couple by the wall. Her laughter died in her throat. Her face, which had been alight with joy, twisted into a mask of pure disgust. The transformation was instantaneous and ugly. Her perfectly painted lips curled into a sneer. She did not lower her voice. She did not consider the 100 pairs of eyes that were on her. She raised her hand, the diamond on her finger catching the light, and pointed directly at Marcus and Alana. The string quartet faltered, a single violin screeching off key before the music died completely. The gentle murmur of conversation evaporated. A thick, heavy silence fell over the glittering ballroom. Every head turned, first to the furious bride and then to the couple she was pointing at. "Excuse me!" Emma's voice, sharp and loud, sliced through the silence. It was a voice accustomed to getting what it wanted, a voice that carried the weight of unearned authority. "You!" she shouted, taking a step forward. "You're at the wrong wedding!" Marcus and Alana stopped. They turned slowly to face her. There was no surprise on Marcus's face, only a profound stillness, a deep calm that seemed to absorb the venom in her voice. Alana's expression was one of quiet disbelief. Her eyes, which had been assessing the room with an artist's care, now filled with a deep, quiet hurt. She could not comprehend the source of such sudden, unprovoked hostility. Gasps rippled through the room. Guests exchanged confused, uncomfortable glances. Who were these people? Why was the bride so angry? Emma, however, seemed to feed on the attention, on the sudden drama that she had created. She took another aggressive step forward, her champagne sloshing over the rim of her glass. "Staff enters through the back," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. She looked them up and down, her gaze lingering on their simple clothes. It was a dismissive, dehumanizing appraisal. "I don't know what you think you're doing, walking in here like you own the place, but you need to leave. Now." Marcus's voice, when he finally spoke, was the opposite of hers. It was low, calm, and firm. It did not carry far, but in the dead silence of the room, it was as clear as a bell. "Ma'am, I think there has been a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Emma spat back, her face flushing with anger, "is why you are still standing here. I will not have my rehearsal dinner ruined by people who clearly don't belong here." She looked around wildly, her eyes searching. "Security!" she shrieked, her voice rising in pitch. "Security! Get them out of here!" The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, bright light that pinned Marcus and Alana in place. It was sharp, it was public, and it was loud. A young woman in a neat black blazer, holding a clipboard to her chest, stood frozen near the stage. It was Chloe Dunn, the event planner. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. She was torn. Her mind screamed at her to do something, to say something. She knew the bride was her client, the one paying the hotel's exorbitant fees. But her heart ached for the quiet, dignified couple who were being subjected to this torrent of abuse. She saw the pain in Alana's eyes, the unyielding calm in Marcus's. She didn't know who they were, but she knew this was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was trapped, a silent witness to a grotesque injustice unfolding in a room filled with white roses. Emma snapped her fingers. It was a sharp, ugly sound that echoed in the cavernous ballroom. The gesture was one of utter command, the kind a person uses for a disobedient pet, not another human being. "Security!" she shouted again, her voice shrill with impatience. "Did you not hear me? I want them out. Escort them out, now!" Two men in crisp black suits, the hotel's security, moved forward from their posts near the main entrance. They walked not with the brisk authority of enforcers, but with a palpable hesitation. Their steps were slow, their eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and dread. One of the guards, a tall man named Frank, who had worked at the hotel for 15 years, recognized Marcus immediately. He had seen him countless times, sometimes in a perfectly tailored suit walking with investors, other times in jeans and a polo shirt, walking the grounds before sunrise. He knew exactly who Marcus Carter was, but he also knew the ironclad rule of his profession. The client is always right. The bride, in this moment, was the client. His mind was a battlefield of conflicting orders. His training told him to obey the client. His gut, his years of experience, screamed at him that he was about to make a catastrophic mistake. Emma saw their hesitation, and it enraged her. It was a challenge to her absolute authority in this room, on this night. She scoffed, a short, derisive sound. "What are you waiting for? Are you deaf?" She pointed a trembling finger at Marcus and Alana again. "Throw them out before they steal something." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Steal something. It was a baseless, cruel escalation, a verbal blow intended to inflict maximum damage. Several guests gasped audibly. A woman in a red dress whispered to her husband, "My goodness, that's just awful." The groom, Ryan Whitfield, finally seemed to surface from his bewildered stupor. He was a young man, handsome but with a perpetual look of unease in his eyes. He rushed to Emma's side, placing a hand on her arm. "Emma, honey, calm down," he mumbled, his face flushed with embarrassment. Let's not make a scene." "They are the scene, Ryan," she hissed, shaking his hand off. "Look at them. This is a disgrace." Alana's composure finally began to crack. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She gripped Marcus's hand, her knuckles white. Her grip was a silent plea, a desperate message. Don't react. Don't give her the satisfaction. Don't become the person she is pretending you are. He felt the tremor in her hand and squeezed it gently, a silent response that said, "I won't. I'm right here." The ballroom had fallen into a silence so profound it felt like the world had stopped breathing. The only sound was the faint, nervous hum of the chandelier lights. Every eye was locked on the drama unfolding in the center of the room. Marcus looked past the fuming bride, past the nervous groom, and met the eyes of the security guard, Frank. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. It was a command, clear and direct, that only Frank would understand. "Stand down." Then Marcus turned his gaze back to Emma. He did not look angry. He did not look humiliated. He looked at her with an expression of cool, detached assessment, like a scientist observing a strange and volatile specimen. A small, composed smile touched the corners of his lips. It was a smile that did not reach his eyes, and it was more unsettling than any shout would have been. "You'll regret this decision," he said. His voice was still quiet, but it carried an undeniable weight, a chilling certainty that cut through the tension. The words were not a threat. They were a simple statement of fact, a prophecy. The words sent a ripple of unease through the hall. Even Emma, in her righteous fury, seemed taken aback for a moment. A flicker of doubt crossed her face before being replaced by renewed arrogance. She tossed her head back. "I doubt that very much." Without another word, Marcus turned. He kept Alana's hand firmly in his and began to walk toward the grand oak doors. They did not rush. Their steps were deliberate, their backs straight, their heads held high. They moved with a quiet dignity that stood in stark contrast to the ugly chaos they were leaving behind. They were not being thrown out. They were choosing to leave. The entire room watched them go, a silent, collective gaze following their retreat. As the heavy doors swung shut behind them, a wave of murmurs broke the silence. "Who were they?" a guest whispered. "I have no idea," another replied. "But did you see her face? The bride is completely unhinged." Chloe, the planner, finally let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She watched the closed doors, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a strange burgeoning respect for the couple who had just left. She had never seen such grace under fire. Emma, however, felt no such respect. She smoothed down the front of her dress and picked up a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter's tray. A triumphant smirk played on her lips. She had faced a challenge to her perfect evening, and she had won. She was the queen in her castle, and she had successfully ejected the intruders. She basked in what she believed was her victory, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just declared war on the king. The elevator ascended in silence, a smooth, swift journey from the glittering chaos of the ballroom to the serene quiet of the penthouse. The doors slid open, revealing a space that was the antithesis of the public persona of the Carter Grand Hotel. Where the ballroom was all gold leaf and crystal, the penthouse was a study in minimalism and warmth. Polished concrete floors were softened by plush, deep-pile rugs. The furniture was modern and clean-lined, but comfortable and inviting. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city skyline. a sprawling tapestry of lights against the dark velvet of the night. This was not a hotel suite. It was a home. Marcus walked directly to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. He stood there, a solitary figure against the vast cityscape, his reflection a faint ghost on the glass. He was no longer the calm, detached observer from the ballroom. Here, in the privacy of his sanctuary, a deep sigh escaped his lips. The mask of composure fell away, revealing the weariness beneath. Alana watched him for a moment before walking to a small, elegant bar in the corner. She poured 2 glasses of water, her movements graceful and deliberate. She brought one to Marcus, her hand gently touching his back as she offered it to him. He took it, his fingers brushing against hers. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He took a slow sip of water before answering. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice was tight. He looked down at the hotel below, their hotel. It never stops, does it?" The question hung in the air, heavy with a shared history of slights and insults, of being underestimated and dismissed. As he stared out the window, his mind drifted back. Flashbacks, sharp and vivid, played behind his eyes. He saw himself as a young man, not much older than 20, wearing a janitor's gray uniform. He saw himself pushing a heavy cleaning cart through the very same hallways he now owned. He remembered the ache in his back after a 12-hour shift, the sting of ammonia in his nostrils. He remembered the way the wealthy guests would look right through him, as if he were part of the furniture, a faceless, nameless cog in the machine that made their luxurious lives possible. He had scrubbed floors in this hotel, cleaned toilets, emptied trash cans, but even then, as he worked in silence, he had been observing. He saw the inefficiencies, the wasted potential, the lazy management that was content with mediocrity. He saw the soul of the building, a grand old dame that had been neglected. And he had made a promise to himself, a quiet, fervent vow whispered in the pre-dawn hours. "One day, this will all be mine, and I will make it better." Alana came to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing against his. She knew where his thoughts had gone. "You did make it better, Marcus," she said, her voice a soothing balm on his wounded pride. She looked out at the view, at the empire they had built together. "You remember why we bought it, don't you?" He nodded, a faint smile returning to his lips. "To prove that excellence has no color," he recited, the words a mantra they had shared for years. It had been their driving force. When they had finally acquired the hotel, after years of ruthless saving, shrewd investments, and sleepless nights, it was in a state of decay. Alana, with her architect's eye and artist's soul, had redesigned everything. She had torn down walls, not just physical ones, but walls of thinking. She envisioned a place of inclusive luxury, where every guest, regardless of their background, felt seen and valued. She designed the spaces, and he, with his sharp business acumen, invested in the people. They built a team that reflected the world, promoting based on merit, not on connections or color. The Carter Grand Hotel wasn't just a property to them. It was a statement. It was their legacy, a monument to their shared belief that dignity and excellence were intertwined. His silence in the ballroom earlier, the restraint that had so impressed Chloe, was now cast in a new light. It wasn't weakness. It was strategy. It was the calculated patience of a man who had played the long game his entire life. He had learned as a janitor that the people with the real power didn't need to shout. They observed, they listened, and they acted when the time was right. "I could call security right now and have that entire wedding canceled," Alana said, a steely edge to her soft voice. The protective instinct she felt for her husband was fierce. "We could have them all out of our building in 10 minutes. Marcus turned from the window to look at her. He reached out and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "No," he said softly. "That would be her way of doing things. Loud, messy, and unsatisfying." A strategic glint returned to his eyes, the mind of the billionaire investor clicking back into place. We'll do it our way. He paused, a plan beginning to form. Let her have her party. Let her toast to her victory. He looked back out at the city lights. Let her walk into the truth herself. The hidden giant was awake, and he was ready to make his move. The irony was almost poetic in its cruelty. Downstairs in the glittering ballroom, Emma Whitfield was celebrating her marriage to a man named Ryan. Upstairs in the silent penthouse, Marcus Carter was contemplating the future of a major expansion deal with a new, promising investor. The name on the top of the meticulously prepared portfolio sitting on Marcus's desk was Whitfield Industries, and the lead negotiator for the deal was its ambitious young vice president, Ryan Whitfield. The man whose bride had just tried to have Marcus thrown out of his own hotel was, at that very moment, unknowingly betting his company's future on Marcus's goodwill. Ryan had no idea that the quiet, well-dressed man his fiancée had publicly humiliated was the final decision-maker on a deal that would define his career. The universe, it seemed, had a flair for dramatic storytelling. Marcus had been on his way to his office to review the final details of the proposal when he and Alana had decided to make one last personal inspection of the ballroom. He wanted to ensure everything was perfect for the family of a potential business partner. The sheer, staggering ignorance of Emma's prejudice had created a collision of worlds that no one could have predicted. Meanwhile, in a small, windowless office in the hotel's administrative wing, Chloe Dunn sat staring at her computer screen. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a stark contrast to the soft glow of the ballroom's chandeliers. The adrenaline from the confrontation had worn off, leaving behind a cold, sickening unease. She couldn't shake the image of the couple's dignified exit. She couldn't forget the bride's venomous words. Something about the man's calm demeanor, his final, chilling sentence, "You'll regret this decision," haunted her. It wasn't the statement of a common trespasser. It was the statement of a man who held cards she couldn't see. Driven by a gnawing curiosity she couldn't explain, she had opened her web browser. She had no name to go on, just a vague description. She typed in, "Owner of Carter Grand Hotel." The search results populated instantly. Her eyes scanned the first few links, all generic corporate profiles. Then she clicked on an article from a major business journal titled, "The Quiet Titans of Hospitality." The page loaded, and a photograph appeared at the top of the article. Chloe froze. A chilling stillness fell over her. The color drained from her face. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The pen she was holding slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the desk. On the screen, smiling back at her, was the man from the ballroom. He was wearing a sharp suit in the photo, standing next to his wife, the elegant woman who had been by his side just moments ago. The caption below the photo read, "Marcus and Alana Carter, co-owners and visionaries behind the Carter Grand Hotel empire." Her heart began to race, a frantic, panicked drumming against her ribs. Marcus Carter. The Marcus Carter. A billionaire investor famous for his low profile and his Midas touch. A man who had built an empire from nothing. He owned this hotel. He owned the ground she was sitting on, the air she was breathing. The bride, her client, her responsibility, had not just insulted a guest. She had publicly humiliated the owner of the entire establishment. She had ordered security to throw out the man who signed their paychecks. The sheer magnitude of the disaster washed over Chloe in a cold wave. She felt sick. She replayed the scene in her head. Emma's sneering voice, the accusation of theft, the final arrogant smirk. And then she remembered Marcus's face. Not angry, but calculating. And his final words echoed in her ears, no longer as a vague warning, but as an absolute certainty. "You'll regret this decision." Chloe realized with a jolt of terror that she, the hotel staff, and especially the bride, were standing on the edge of a cliff, and Emma Whitfield had just gleefully jumped off, dragging everyone down with her. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that she could not stay silent. She had to do something. She had to try to fix this. Chloe's hands trembled as she picked up her office phone. Her mind was a whirlwind of panic. What should she do? Who should she call? Going to her direct manager was useless. He would just try to cover it up to protect the hotel from a lawsuit. Going to the bride was unthinkable. Emma was the cause of the problem, not the solution. There was only one path, as terrifying as it was. She had to go to the source. She looked up the number for the executive offices, a number she had never dared to call before. Her finger hovered over the keypad. This could be the end of her career. Intervening in a situation this volatile was a massive risk. She could be fired for overstepping her bounds, but staying silent felt worse. It felt like complicity. She thought of the quiet dignity of Marcus and Alana, the undeserved cruelty they had endured. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she dialed the number. A calm, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Mr. Carter's office, this is Amelia speaking." Chloe's own voice was a nervous squeak. "Hello, my name is Chloe Dunn. I'm an event planner here at the hotel." She paused, her throat suddenly dry. I need to leave a message for Mr. Carter. It's about the incident at the Whitfield rehearsal dinner tonight." "Mr. Carter is aware of the incident," Amelia replied, her tone unreadable. "Yes, I'm sure he is," Chloe stammered. I want to offer my deepest, most sincere apology for what happened, and for not stepping in." I froze. It was unprofessional and unacceptable, and I am so sorry for the disrespect he and Mrs. Carter were shown. She rushed the words out, a torrent of genuine remorse. "If there is anything at all I can do, please, just ask for a meeting. I just want to apologize in person." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "I will pass along your message, Ms. Dunn," Amelia said finally, before the line went dead. Chloe hung up the phone, her body trembling. She had done it. She had either just signed her own termination papers or taken the first step toward making things right. Downstairs, the party had resumed, though the atmosphere remained strained. Emma, however, was blissfully unaware. She was holding court with her bridesmaids, a fresh glass of champagne in her hand. "Can you believe the nerve of some people?" she said, her voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Just walking in here as if they belong. It's a good thing I was here to handle it. You have to put staff in their place from the beginning, or they'll walk all over you." One of her bridesmaids nodded enthusiastically, while another just stared into her glass, looking deeply uncomfortable. Ryan approached her again, his brow furrowed with worry. "Emma, do you really think you should have been so aggressive?" he asked in a low voice. "We don't even know who they were." "I know exactly who they were, Ryan," she snapped, dismissing his concern with a wave of her hand. "They were people trying to crash our wedding, and I took care of it. End of story." The next morning, Chloe was sitting at her desk, nursing a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, when her phone rang. It was Amelia from Mr. Carter's office. "Mr. Carter will see you now," she said simply. "The penthouse elevator is unlocked for you." Chloe's heart leaped into her throat. She smoothed down her blazer, took a deep breath, and walked to the private elevator. The ride up was the longest of her life. When the doors opened, Marcus Carter was standing there, not in a suit, but in a simple dark shirt and trousers. He was looking out the panoramic window, just as he had been the night before. He turned as she stepped out, and his expression was not angry or intimidating. It was calm, almost gentle. "Miss Dunn," he said, his voice even. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice shaking. "I am so sorry for everything." He listened silently as she poured out her apology again, her words tumbling over each other. He let her speak without interruption. When she finally fell silent, her eyes filled with tears, he gave a small nod. He walked over to a small seating area and gestured for her to sit. She did, perching nervously on the edge of the plush sofa. "You did what you thought was safe," he said, his voice devoid of judgment. It was a simple observation. You were in a difficult position. Your client, your employer. He paused, his gaze steady and direct. Now let's make things right. Chloe looked up, surprised by his collaborative tone. He smiled, a genuine warm smile this time. There is an investor showcase scheduled for tomorrow morning in the Grand Ballroom for Whitfield Industries. Chloe nodded, her mind racing. Of course, the groom. I need you to prepare the room, Marcus continued, his voice taking on a new tone of quiet authority. Ensure the presentation equipment is flawless. Have refreshments prepared. See to every detail personally. He leaned forward slightly. But you will not tell Emma or Ryan who is leading the meeting. You will not tell them I am attending. As far as they know, they are meeting with my executive team. Is that clear? A sense of awe and dawning understanding spread through Chloe. This wasn't just about punishment. This was about something bigger. It was a perfectly orchestrated lesson in humility. Yes, Mr. Carter, she said, her voice clear and steady for the first time. Crystal clear. He was giving her a chance not just to apologize, but to be part of the solution. He was trusting her, and she would not let him down. The rehearsal dinner continued long into the night. A glittering facade of celebration stretched thin over a foundation of simmering tension. For Emma, however, the night was an unmitigated triumph. She floated through the ballroom, a radiant queen in her white gown, basking in the glow of what she perceived as her own power. Photographers, hired to capture every perfect moment, followed her every move. She posed with her bridesmaids, laughing into the camera as if she didn't have a care in the world. She clinked glasses with her father, a portly man whose face was flushed from too much expensive wine. With every click of the camera's shutter, she felt more validated, more certain of her place in the world. She found a small group of her cousins near the towering 5-tiered wedding cake and began recounting her version of the evening's events, her voice carrying across the room. You should have seen it, she said, her tone a mixture of drama and glee. They just wandered in from God knows where. The hotel management really needs to keep better track of who walks in off the street. It's a serious security issue. Her words were laced with a thick, syrupy layer of classist entitlement. She spoke of Marcus and Alana not as people, but as a problem, a contamination that she had successfully cleansed from her pristine environment. She was the hero of her own story, the vigilant protector of social order. The hotel staff, who moved silently around the perimeter of the party, refilling glasses and clearing plates, exchanged uneasy glances. They had all heard the whispers. They knew what had happened. Many of them had worked at the Carter Grand for years. They respected Mr. and Mrs. Carter not just as owners, but as people. They had seen Marcus walk the grounds at dawn, talking to the gardeners by name. They had seen Alana in the kitchens, consulting with the chefs about menu designs. To hear them spoken of in such a vile, dismissive way made their blood run cold. Their faces remained impassive masks of professional service, but behind their eyes a quiet resentment simmered. Ryan stood a short distance away, watching his fiancée. The initial embarrassment he had felt had curdled into a deep, gnawing unease. He had seen the couple she had berated. They didn't look like vagrants. They looked composed, dignified. There was a quiet power to the man that Ryan couldn't quite place, but it had unsettled him. Emma's constant retelling of the story, each time with more embellishment and self-congratulation, was making his skin crawl. He tried to steer her away from the topic, to change the subject. Emma, let's not dwell on it, he said, attempting a smile as he put his arm around her. Let's just enjoy our night. She shrugged him off, her smile not faltering as she looked back at her audience. I am enjoying it, she said brightly. I'm just saying, people need to learn their place. People like that don't belong in places like this. She took a delicate sip of her champagne, oblivious to the ticking clock that was counting down the final hours of her reign. She was so insulated by her privilege, so wrapped in the certainty of her own superiority, that she couldn't see the abyss that was opening up right under her feet. Chloe stood by the ballroom doors overseeing the final cleanup after the guests had departed. She had heard Emma's pronouncements, had seen the staff's pained expressions, had watched Ryan's growing discomfort. She looked at the bride, now laughing with her father by the gift table, and felt a strange mixture of pity and disgust. Emma was living in a fairy tale of her own making, a world where she was the princess and everyone else was just a supporting character or a villain to be vanquished. But Chloe knew something Emma didn't. She knew the fairy tale was about to come to a very abrupt and brutal end. The king of the castle was coming home, and he was not happy. The champagne victory Emma was celebrating tonight would taste like ashes in her mouth by tomorrow morning. Later that night, long after the last echoes of the party had faded from the ballroom, Marcus stood once again by the panoramic window in his penthouse. The city below was quieter now, a glittering carpet of diamonds stretching to the horizon. Alana was asleep in their bedroom, the emotional toll of the evening having finally exhausted her. But Marcus was wide awake. The calm he had projected all evening had solidified into a cold, hard resolve. This was no longer just about a personal insult. It was about the core principles upon which they had built their entire empire. It was about respect, dignity, and the simple, non-negotiable truth that a person's worth is not determined by the clothes they wear or the color of their skin. He turned from the window and walked to the sleek modern desk that sat in the corner of the vast living space. He picked up his phone. His movements were slow, deliberate, each one infused with a sense of purpose. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb stopping on a single name. David Chen, legal. He pressed the call button. The phone rang only once before it was answered. Marcus, David's voice said, alert and professional even at this late hour. Is everything all right? Everything is under control, David, Marcus replied, his tone quiet and even. There was no anger in his voice, only an unnerving, deliberate calm. I need you to do something for me first thing in the morning. I'm moving up the Whitfield Industries presentation. Moving it up? To when? David asked, a note of surprise in his voice. To 9 a.m. sharp, in the grand ballroom, Marcus said. And I need you to have all the relevant documents ready. The full ownership prospectus for the Carter Grand Hotel Group, the architectural blueprints for the new wing that Mrs. Carter designed, and a copy of the finalized investment contract we were planning to offer Ryan Whitfield. He paused for a moment. And clear my morning schedule. I'll be attending the meeting in person. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. David Chen had been Marcus's lawyer for over a decade. He knew his client's moods, his rhythms. He knew that Marcus rarely, if ever, attended initial investor meetings himself. He was the man behind the curtain, the final signature on the deal. His personal presence meant something significant was happening. David was too professional to ask for the details, but he could hear the steel in Marcus's voice. Consider it done, Marcus, he said. I'll have everything couriered to the hotel by 8. Thank you, David, Marcus said, and ended the call. He placed the phone back on the desk with a soft click. The trap was set. Every piece was in place. This was not a plan born of rage or a desire for petty revenge. It was something cleaner, more precise. It was a restoration of balance. It was a lesson that needed to be taught, not with shouting or insults, but with the undeniable crushing weight of the truth. Alana appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, wrapped in a silk robe. She had been woken by the low murmur of his voice. She looked at him, at the resolute set of his jaw, the focus in his eyes. She didn't need to ask what he was doing. She knew. A soft, proud smile touched her lips. This was the man she had married. The quiet janitor with the fire in his eyes. The man who saw the world not just as it was, but as it should be. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. It was about defending the sanctuary they had built, not just of luxury, but of respect. She walked over to him and placed her hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of solidarity. He covered her hand with his own, and together they looked out at the sleeping city, waiting for the dawn. The next morning, the grand ballroom was unrecognizable. The soft, romantic glow of the rehearsal dinner was gone. The white roses and string quartet had been replaced by the stark, professional atmosphere of a high-stakes corporate meeting. A massive projection screen dominated the stage where the musicians had played. A long, polished mahogany table stood in the center of the room, set with notepads, pens, and glasses of iced water. The air, which had been filled with the scent of flowers and perfume, now smelled of fresh coffee and ambition. Chloe Dunn moved through the room with a newfound confidence, double-checking every detail. The projectors were tested, the microphones were live, the lighting was perfect. She had personally overseen every aspect of the setup, driven by a powerful sense of purpose. She was no longer just an event planner. She was an instrument of a carefully orchestrated plan. At precisely 5 minutes to 9, Ryan Whitfield arrived, with Emma on his arm. Ryan looked nervous but excited. He wore his best suit, his face a mixture of hope and anxiety. This meeting was the culmination of months of hard work, a chance to prove himself to his father and secure his company's future. Emma, on the other hand, looked bored. She had insisted on coming along, treating the important business meeting as just another opportunity to be seen in a luxurious setting. She was already complaining before they had even fully entered the room. "Honestly, Ryan, I don't see why this couldn't have been done at your office," she said, looking around with a critical eye. "And why this room? It feels so cold today. The staff here is so inconsistent." She noticed Chloe standing by the side of the room, clipboard in hand. "Oh, it's you," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Let's hope you're more competent today than you were last night." Chloe met her gaze, her expression perfectly neutral. "Good morning, Ms. Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield, if you'll please take a seat, the meeting is scheduled to begin shortly." As they sat down at the table, a few other executives, presumably from Ryan's team, filed in and took their places. The doors at the far end of the ballroom remained closed. The room was quiet, filled with the palpable tension of anticipation. Ryan nervously shuffled his papers, rehearsing his opening lines in his head. Emma scrolled through her phone, sighing with theatrical impatience. Then, at exactly 9 a.m., the grand oak doors swung open. But it wasn't a team of mid-level executives who walked in. It was Marcus Carter. He was not wearing the simple cashmere sweater from the night before. Today, he was dressed in an immaculate, custom-tailored black suit that fit him like a second skin. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His demeanor was one of effortless power and absolute command. He was flanked by a small group of his own top executives, including his lawyer, David Chen, who carried a sleek leather briefcase. They walked into the room not as guests, but as owners, their footsteps echoing with authority on the polished floor. The entire room froze. Ryan Whitfield's jaw literally dropped. The pen he was nervously fiddling with fell from his hand and rolled across the mahogany table. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and slack-jawed. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The man from last night. The man his fiancée had called a thief. The man he had watched being humiliated. That same man was now walking toward him, radiating an aura of power that was so intense it felt like a physical force. Emma looked up from her phone, annoyed by the sudden silence. Her eyes fell on Marcus. Her face cycled through a series of emotions in a matter of seconds. First, confusion, then outrage, and finally, a dawning, sickening horror. Her skin turned a blotchy, pale white. She looked from Marcus to Ryan, and back again, her mind utterly failing to connect the dots. The guests and executives who had been invited to the showcase, who were seated in rows behind the main table, began to murmur. They recognized Marcus Carter. His picture was frequently in the financial pages. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire. "Is that—" "It's him. It's Marcus Carter." Marcus walked calmly to the head of the table. He did not look at Ryan or Emma. He addressed the assembled investors with a smooth, welcoming voice. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice amplified slightly by the room's hidden microphones. "Thank you all for coming." He smiled, a confident, charismatic smile that belonged on the cover of a magazine. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marcus Carter." He paused, letting the name settle in the silent room. Then he turned his gaze slowly, deliberately toward the head of the table and made direct eye contact with the pale, trembling bride. "Welcome to my hotel." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered every other sound in the room. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Emma's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. Her brain was furiously trying to reject the reality that was staring her in the face. This was impossible. A janitor, a trespasser, a thief. Her mind recoiled from the truth, clinging desperately to the prejudice that had felt so comfortable just hours before. Her voice, when she finally found it, was a cracked, disbelieving whisper. "You?" she stammered, pointing a shaky finger. "You're the driver from yesterday." It was a pathetic attempt to force him back into the box she had created for him, to reduce him once more to a role she could understand and control. Marcus's calm expression did not waver. He didn't even blink. He corrected her with a quiet, devastating precision. "No, ma'am," he said, his voice as sharp and clean as breaking glass. "I'm the owner." He let that word hang in the air for a beat. "The one who approved your wedding booking. The one who signs the paychecks for every staff member in this building." He took a slow step closer to the table, his gaze never leaving her face. "I'm the same man you tried to humiliate in front of my own guests, in my own ballroom." The silence in the hall was finally broken by a collective gasp from the assembled investors. Their eyes darted from Marcus's cool, composed face to Emma's crumbling one. Ryan looked as though he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. His face was burning with a shame so profound it was painful to watch. His career, his future, was imploding right before his eyes, all because of the woman sitting next to him. As if on cue, Chloe Dunn stepped forward. Her nervousness was gone, replaced by a quiet, determined resolve. She held a small tablet in her hands. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice clear and steady, "with your permission, I have the security footage from last night's incident, cued and ready to play." Marcus gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Proceed, Ms. Dunn." Chloe tapped the screen. The massive projection screen behind the stage, which had been displaying the Carter Grand Hotel logo, flickered to life. It showed a high-angle, crystal-clear view of the ballroom from the night before. The scene was silent, but the images were damning. The footage showed Emma, her face twisted in a mask of ugly rage, pointing her finger. It showed her shouting, her body language aggressive and demeaning. It showed Marcus and Alana standing calm and composed in the face of her tirade. It showed her snapping her fingers for security. And it showed her final, triumphant smirk as they walked away. The entire grotesque episode played out in vivid detail for everyone to see. More gasps filled the hall. Phones were discreetly pulled out, their cameras recording the unfolding drama. When the video ended, the screen went black, plunging the room back into a tense twilight. Every eye was now on Emma. Her carefully applied makeup was starting to smear as tears of panic and humiliation welled in her eyes. Her facade of arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind the raw, ugly truth of her prejudice. She turned to Marcus, her voice a desperate, pleading whine. I didn't know," she cried, the words tumbling out of her. "I didn't know who you were." Marcus looked at her, and for the first time, a flicker of something cold and hard entered his eyes. His voice dropped, losing its polite, professional tone and taking on the unyielding weight of judgment. "That's the point," he said, his words striking her with the force of a physical blow. "You didn't know. And you didn't care to know. You saw a black man in a sweater, and you saw a woman in a simple dress, And you decided they were worthless. You decided they didn't belong. You judged their value without knowing a single thing about them. Your apology isn't because you're sorry for what you did. It's because you're sorry you got caught doing it to me. A single tear finally escaped and rolled down Emma's cheek, leaving a pale track through her foundation. She had been so certain of her power, and in the space of 5 minutes, she had been left with nothing. The 2 security guards from the previous night, including Frank, stepped forward from the side of the room. This time, there was no hesitation in their movements. They moved with a brisk professional purpose, their faces grim and set. They walked directly toward the head of the table, their destination clear. They were acting under a new set of orders now, direct from the owner himself. Marcus looked away from Emma, his dismissal of her so complete, it was as if she had ceased to exist. His gaze fell upon the shell-shocked groom. He spoke to Ryan, his voice returning to a calm, businesslike tone, which was somehow even more devastating. "Mr. Whitfield," he said calmly, "your proposal for the expansion is intriguing. You are welcome to stay and discuss the investment with my executive team." He gestured to the other men in suits who had entered with him. It was a lifeline, a slim chance for Ryan to salvage something from the wreckage. Then Marcus turned his head slightly, his eyes briefly flicking back to the weeping bride. His next words were delivered with the cold finality of a judge passing sentence. "But she," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion, "is no longer welcome here. Not in this meeting, not in this hotel, not ever." Emma's head snapped up. A strangled sob escaped her lips. "No," she stammered, her voice shaking violently. "You can't. You can't do this to me. This is my wedding." The guests who had been murmuring fell silent again, their phones held up, openly recording the final, brutal act of this corporate drama. Marcus responded without even looking at her directly, his attention already focused on the investors in the room. His voice was calm, almost conversational, yet it carried the absolute, unshakable power of a king in his own court. "I just did." The words hung in the air, a final, brutal confirmation of her powerlessness. The security guards reached the table. One of them, Frank, stood beside her chair. "Ma'am," he said, his voice respectful but firm, "you need to come with us." Her face, which had been pale with shock, now crumpled completely. The carefully constructed mask of the perfect, powerful bride shattered into a million pieces, revealing the hysterical, entitled person underneath. Sobs racked her body. "No, get away from me!" she shrieked, batting away the guard's hand. "Ryan, do something!" But Ryan just sat there, frozen in his chair, his face buried in his hands. He was a man watching his personal and professional life burn to the ground simultaneously. He couldn't even look at her. The guards gently but firmly took her by the arms and lifted her from her chair. She was escorted, sobbing and stumbling out of the grand ballroom past the rows of stunned investors and their recording phones. The grand oak doors that she had entered with such arrogance just minutes before now swung shut behind her, sealing her fate. Emma Whitfield, the bride, had been publicly and ceremoniously kicked out of her own wedding venue. The echo of her fading sobs was the only sound left in the silent, astonished room. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Before Emma had even reached the hotel lobby, the first clips of the confrontation were already appearing online. Someone from the investor meeting had leaked a video, and it spread through social media like a digital wildfire. The initial post was a simple phone recording, shaky but clear, with a caption that read, "CEO kicks entitled Karen bride out of her own wedding rehearsal after she racially profiled him the night before." Within an hour, it had 1 million views. By noon, it was 10 million. The internet had found its new main character and its new villain. The story was irresistible. It had a clear hero, the calm, self-made black billionaire. It had a perfect antagonist, the arrogant, racist bride. And it had a deliciously satisfying climax, the public humiliation of someone who had so cruelly tried to humiliate others. The clip went viral on every platform. Hashtags like #CarterGrand, #Bridezilla, gets booted, and hashed Emma Whitfield. Us Over trended for days. Memes were created. News outlets picked up the story, first the local channels, then the national networks. The narrative was simple and powerful, a story of quiet dignity triumphing over loud-mouthed arrogance. For Emma, the consequences were catastrophic. Her carefully curated social media presence, a pristine gallery of luxury vacations and designer clothes, collapsed under an avalanche of negative comments and hateful messages. Her friends, the same bridesmaids who had watched her performance the night before, began to distance themselves, deleting photos of her from their own accounts. Her name became synonymous with entitled racist behavior. The digital footprint of her humiliation was permanent. Ryan Whitfield, in an act of swift and brutal damage control, withdrew from the wedding that same afternoon. A short, terse statement was released through his company's PR firm announcing that the engagement was off and the wedding was cancelled, citing irreconcilable differences. He never spoke to Emma again. The investment deal with Marcus Carter, the deal that was meant to be his crowning achievement, was quietly and indefinitely postponed. His association with Emma had made him radioactive. The Carter Grand Hotel, far from suffering any negative publicity, saw its reputation soar. The hotel released a carefully worded statement drafted by Alana herself. It didn't mention Emma by name. It simply reaffirmed the hotel's core values of respect, equality, and integrity, and stated that the establishment was a place where everyone is welcome and where dignity is the highest form of luxury. The statement was praised online, and the hotel was flooded with messages of support. Bookings spiked. People wanted to stay at the hotel owned by the man who stood up to a bigot. In the midst of the media frenzy, Chloe Dunn received an email. It was from Marcus Carter's office. She had been promoted to senior event director for the entire Carter Grand Hotel Group, a position that came with a significant raise and expanded responsibilities. Her single act of courage, of choosing her conscience over her comfort, had changed the trajectory of her career. Reporters and news vans crowded the hotel entrance for days, hoping to get a comment from the man at the center of the storm. But Marcus Carter remained, as always, composed and out of sight. The day after the incident, as the story was reaching its viral peak, he was photographed quietly walking Alana to their car. He held the door for her, his expression unreadable. He ignored the reporters' shouted questions, got into the driver's seat, and drove away. He had already said everything that needed to be said, not with words to the media, but with his calm, decisive actions. He had no interest in the spectacle. He had simply restored balance to his world, and now it was back to business. A year later, the grand ballroom of the Carter Grand Hotel was once again filled with the sounds of celebration. But this wedding was different. The guests were a vibrant, joyful mix of people from all walks of life, a beautiful mosaic of cultures and backgrounds. Laughter echoed through the hall, genuine and unrestrained. The bride and groom, a young interracial couple, radiated a happiness that was infectious. The whole room felt lighter, warmer, infused with a spirit of genuine inclusivity. Marcus and Alana stood near the back of the ballroom, watching the celebration. They were dressed simply, just as they had been a year ago. But this time, no one would have dared to question their presence. They were not just owners. They were guardians of this space, ensuring it lived up to the promise of its creed. Standing beside them was Chloe Dunn. She was no longer the nervous, uncertain planner, but a poised and confident director, overseeing the event with a calm authority she had learned from her mentors. She smiled as she watched the happy couple on the dance floor. "They seem so happy," she said to Marcus. He nodded, a gentle smile on his face. "This is what it's all about," he replied softly. He looked around the room at the smiling faces, the dancing guests, the harmonious blend of people. This was the vision Alana had sketched out all those years ago, brought to life. He turned to Chloe, his expression thoughtful. "People show you who they really are when they think no one important is watching," he said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of experience. It was the lesson of the janitor, the secret of the billionaire. True character isn't a performance for the powerful. It's how you treat those you believe have no power at all. Power doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to boast or belittle. It only needs to stand still long enough for the truth to find its own echo. And in that echo, in the quiet space between arrogance and humility, is where true strength is found. Respect costs nothing, but arrogance, as one bride learned in this very room, can cost you absolutely everything. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.